It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. You can email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. If you like our show, be sure and check out Patreon. We've got a lot of new content going up there each month on Patreon. And we do a live show each Friday night on Spreaker.com, where we keep our archives. And if you sign up over there for free at Spreaker, there's a chat room. And also, too, you get an email notification anytime I put up new content. I do put up repeats there on Spreaker every single night. Keep an eye out. I'm going to be doing an interview on Crossroads from the Epoch Times. They're going to be interviewing me this coming up Monday on the Maxwell trial, the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. And speaking of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, we have with us today Marlon Ettinger. You can find him on Twitter at Marlon Ettinger. But also, too, you can find his work, his writing, at footnotesnews.substack.com. He flew down. He traveled to New York. He's been staying in New York for over a month, covering the Epstein trial, the Maxwell trial, and now also covering the Prince Andrew trial. Although he may not be called Prince Andrew anymore. He may be called just Andrew of York. Right? Marlon Ettinger, are you there?
Hey, how's it going? Yeah.
I'm doing good.
Yeah, it looks like that's the big news the other day, isn't it?
Yeah, remind the audience, though, who you are. Who's Marlon Ettinger? Because we had you on twice, right?
Yeah. I think just once during the trial. And, yeah, I've been covering the Maxwell trial. Now it's over, though actually who knows if it's over. There's a lot more going on with it, with the juror and a possibility of a new trial. Like you said, you can find everything on footnotesnews.substack.com. I'm probably going to be doing more reporting there since more people are following now. I'm going to be back in France for the presidential election, so you might have that to look forward to. But yeah.
Well, let's start with this. How did we left off on the Maxwell trial with a happy conviction? I didn't feel too happy about it. I don't know. I did a show about 9 years on the Epstein case, and how I really feel nothing. I feel like really nothing's been accomplished. This tiny little conviction on Maxwell. But then since then, there's been some trouble, right?
Yeah, there's been this juror trouble. I have an article about that on Footnotes News, but basically what happened was this juror, Scotty David, that's his first and middle name, started talking to the press pretty much right after the verdict, and he disclosed that he had been sexually abused when he was younger, and that he had mentioned that during the deliberations of the jury. And that had affected the jury's decision. According to him, some people were vacillating and they weren't sure about some of the memories of the girls, but he told them that, that's what it's like. You remember the main event, but maybe you're not so sure on the details. And now, after that, Maxwell's defense filed, a motion for a new trial because they say that he didn't disclose this on his jury selection questionnaire. There's a form called, there's a question on that form, question 48, that asks specifically, have you been sexually abused, or do you know anyone who's been sexually abused in your life? And that doesn't disqualify you necessarily, because then there's more questions to ask, if so, do you still think you can be fair? But, and we don't know this for certain because I haven't seen the form, but there was some reporting more recently saying that by the Telegraph and by Fox News that he hadn't disclosed that on this form. Well, so that's like a big entryway for Maxwell's lawyers to. Yeah,
that's huge. In any kind of trial like this, when they're polling the jury, one of the things when they're screening the jury, one of the things they always ask if you've been involved in a similar crime as the accused,
right,
and or a family member, And if you don't check that off, like you said, that's wide open for a new trial. But also too, if he was adding things, his own personal experiences in life, to the jury deliberations. That should have been shut down by the foreman. So, two major issues there.
Yeah, so there's basically a timeline now for these new motions by the defense and the prosecution. And then basically by February 9th, there'll be the government's reply or rather the defense's reply to the government's opposition to a new trial. And at that point, then the judge will rule whether or not there should be a new trial. The prosecution is still trying to go forward with the sentencing. They're trying to schedule it between 3 and 4 months from now. And, the probation office is going to have to produce their pre-sentence investigation report,
right,
where they investigate Maxwell's background and say if there might be anything mitigating, which could be very interesting when that comes out, if it does come out publicly. But aside from that, that's it for the trial, unless there's a new one. There is the sentencing, and supposedly the prosecution has struck a deal to drop the perjury charges.
Right.
If the conviction goes forward, because they say they don't want the victims to have to go through testifying again. And they figure they've got enough to lock her down for the rest of her life anyway.
Yeah, especially since a second trial, now the defense knows where to poke, because they've already polled the jury and stuff, and they'll know where to poke these witnesses and where to press them. So this is really bad news. Now, have any of the other juries been questioned in any of this to see if they were adversely influenced by this man's comments?
Well, that's what the defense wants to happen. The defense says that the entire jury should be questioned. They want all 12 jurors questioned to find out more about this juror's behavior. Now, 2 other jurors, at least one, I think, has spoken with the Times anonymously, saying that they too were a victim of sexual abuse, but it's unclear whether or not that's been disclosed. So there's no indication that it wasn't. But the defense definitely wants to question the entire jury to find out what happened.
Well, reasonably, I think it would be impossible to find 12 people and not 1 or 2 haven't been molested as children. The society we live in. So there's that. You can't expect that, a jury of unscathed, impartial jurors that they've never been victimized in their life. But these other juries, that they've given press interviews?
I think only one has talked with the press, and they did so anonymously. There's not much information that came out about that at the Times. But this guy, Scotty David, he has now, of course, he has a lawyer. Todd Spodek is going to be his lawyer, who I believe was Anna Delvey's lawyer, if you remember that story. She was this fake heiress going around New York. So
I do remember.
He got her.
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah.
So he's got Todd Spodek representing him. And he's shut down all his social media accounts, of course. Supposedly the way that he was found was he was posting on Instagram that he had been a juror on the Maxwell trial. And so people, of course, just reached out to him that way.
Now, a couple of things. Was he paid for this interview? Do we know?
I don't know that. There's no indication.
Okay.
But Carolyn, who was one of the witnesses who testified in the trial, she went and was interviewed by the Daily Mail too.
Right.
That was very interesting. And it was stated specifically that she was not paid for that interview. And she said that she remembered Virginia Giuffre telling her that she had slept with Prince Andrew. She had been texted by her at the time.
Oh, she said that in the interview?
Yeah, Carolyn.
Okay, now that's interesting, because we have a whole other case now with the Virginia Roberts Giuffre now is suing Prince Andrew. One last question about this guy, Scotty David, okay? Someone was claiming that he works for the Carlyle Group. What do we know?
True, yeah,
oh, boy. What does he do for the Carlyle Group? What do we know there?
Supposedly has some kind of low-level position. Bloomberg came out with an article about it. So, he definitely works at the Carlyle Group. I don't think he's some big muckety muck there though. But it is funny, isn't it? Founder of the Carlyle Group. What was he on the Council of Foreign Relations? Same with Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah.
Maybe it means nothing, but it's a funny little connection. It just shows how incestuous that world is.
Yeah, and just the fact that he's not a big muckety muck over there doesn't mean that he doesn't want a nice bonus in his paycheck for for doing the right thing for these guys. Just amazing. I don't know.
Christmas bonus.
Yeah, right. You know, this is why I don't know. I don't feel. I don't have a bad feeling about this whole thing. I've been saying it the whole time. I just got a very bad feeling because my thinking is okay. If we're to believe, and I think there's a lot to it, that the idea behind Maxwell and Epstein was blackmail and influence, using influence over people, extortion. That if this is what they do for a living, why would they not be reaching out to jurors and judges and prosecutors and their families and all this kind of stuff? It just seems that that's what they do. That's what they're professionals at. Why wouldn't they continue that? And just the idea that the deliberations went on so long, and that they were bringing back prosecution witnesses, trying to poke holes in the memories of the victims, was just very disturbing to me all along.
Definitely. Yeah. You figure if you're facing life in prison, why not try something like that?
Exactly, right. But she's only facing
about get double life.
I think it's like 65 years, right?
Yeah. Well, it's not life in prison, but it's like 45 to 65 years,
right,
like that. But it's definitely. I think she'll die in prison if she gets that term.
Yeah.
She's 60 years old,
Yeah, I know the feeling. Okay, I know the feeling. Okay, I wouldn't want to be sitting there myself. Now, Prince Andrew, or should we call him the formerly the artist formerly known as Prince Andrew? What is
Andrew, formerly known as Prince?
Yeah, right. So, what's going on with that? Now, tell us all the hearings you've attended and you've been following.
Yeah. So basically, the suit was filed. It was basically this complaint filed by Virginia Giuffre against Prince Andrew in August 2021. It was filed by David Boyes' firm, who's been representing her for a while now, and alleged that Andrew had sexually abused Giuffre on separate occasions when she was a child under the age of 18. And went on to say that, Jeffrey Epstein, Elaine Maxwell, and Prince Andrew had forced her to have intercourse against her will at Maxwell's home in London. And then at Epstein's home in New York, she and another victim were forced to sit on Andrew's lap while he touched her. And that Andrew had forced her, Virginia Giuffre, to engage in sex acts against her will. And furthermore, that had also happened on Little St. James, Jeffrey Epstein's island, in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And there's a little interesting sort of story of why it was filed when it was. It was filed, just 5 days before the expiry of this New York Child Victims Act,
right,
which came into effect. Well, it was passed in February 2019. That came into effect 6 months later. They basically gave a 1 year window for people to file money damages for child sexual abuse, even despite the fact that the statute of limitations might have expired. So she filed on, August 9th, because there had been a further extension of the act by Cuomo. Because of COVID, they were saying people didn't have access to the courthouse, so they extended it further.
Okay. And
Giuffre said that she felt compelled to file the act because Andrew wasn't being cooperative. He had famously said in that interview on the BBC that he would cooperate with anybody. He'd cooperate with the FBI. He had no involvement. He was here to help, but then subsequently hadn't cooperated with anybody, hadn't responded to any contact from her lawyers, etc. And she'd even proposed something called a tolling agreement, which would have extended the window when she could file for monetary damages while they came to an agreement. She had proposed that extension until the end of 2022, but got no response. So what's happened recently? So that's been, working its way through the docket and all the normal pre-trial things. They want jury trials. She says she's not going to settle. And the most recent development that led to Andrew's titles some of his titles being taken away by Buckingham Palace was this decision by the judge that the trial will go forward.
Right.
There were arguments recently between, Prince Andrew's lawyer, Andrew Brettler, and David Boyce, who was Trey's main lawyer, about whether or not there was even standing for this. And the defense took they took two strategies to try to say that there shouldn't be a trial. The first was that, Andrew Cuomo's extension of the New York Child Victims Act was unconstitutional. He just extended it by executive order, so it's completely outside the statute of limitations. And then the other way they tried to argue against it was they were saying that there was been this settlement between Virginia Giuffre and Jeffrey Epstein in 2009, where Epstein had paid her $500,000 to drop this lawsuit against him, and also any future claims against any potential defendants. And they were saying that, Andrew was a potential defendant, so we should be able to reject it. But then the judge said, it's not unconstitutional, and there was no really specific. It's impossible to tell who exactly was meant by potential defendant because Epstein is dead, so you can't ask his opinion.
Let me ask you this.
So now,
at one point, Andrew was actually dodging the service, right?
I hadn't heard that. Yeah, was he?
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, they was dodging the service of a process there, and so they served the doorman at Buckingham at the palace or his residence or wherever his official residence is. They served the cops at his front door, and he was claiming that wasn't sufficient service. So, a couple of questions, just in general, before you get back into the details of the case. Why do you think that Andrew hasn't settled this quietly?
I know Virginia Giuffre has publicly said she does not want to settle.
Right.
I don't know any background details of what's going on, but maybe he has tried to settle it, and she is just, for this one, refusing to settle it. She's got a lot of, from a bunch of she's got a lot of settlements from civil litigation, so maybe she figures, I don't need any more. I just want to prosecute. I want to go the distance with this one.
Okay, then you mentioned settlements a couple of times. Because we talked about this off the air on email. What do you make of this amount, $500,000, which is incredibly low for a settlement with Epstein? Especially, she's the highest profile survivor in that case. So what is the gossip going around the courtroom when people heard that she settled for $500,000?
I've heard from a trusted source that it could that it might have been the idea that he was settling for $1 million back then, basically,
right?
And which implies that maybe he was with every girl he was settling for $1 million, settling for $1 million, settling for $1 million.
Yeah.
The fact that he paid her $500,000 might have meant that someone else covered the other half. That's speculation, but it is interesting. Who might that have been? There's plenty of people it could have been. But who knows? Right,
because in my work, we just settled a very similar type case, and the defendant in the case doesn't have 1% of the money that Epstein has. Not even 1%. In fact, this guy was complaining he was broke. We had to do a financial accounting of his net worth. We got $400,000 out of this guy. So it just shocks my mind that she settled for $500,000 when everyone was getting way more than that, more than double that at that time. So, but the local press was anybody shocked at that amount, or this just they didn't register?
Well, I just read the document on the docket.
Gotcha.
We weren't in the courtroom when it came out, but it does seem like an odd number. He said to give up all future claims against him back in 2009.
Right.
She was being represented even back then by sophisticated lawyers.
Right.
They weren't people who were just willing to take a small deal, who were thinking, sophisticated lawyers who were thinking long term. I figured there had to have been some other agreement. I mean, I don't know as well about settlements as you might know. Is that common that people will settle and other people will pay covertly? Or
yes, it's definitely it's definitely common for there to be side cash settlements, besides what you agreed to in the paperwork, and it's a shake hand deal, and then when you sign it right there, this box full of cash pushed across the table. Okay. Things like that. All kinds of stuff goes on. Now, one more thing, too, I want the audience to be aware of, because you mentioned a couple of times the statute of limitations. And in New York City, yes, there is a statute of limitations on child sexual abuse settlements. But in California, there is none. And in many states, there are none. So you want to consult with an attorney before you think, hey, this is too long ago. I don't have enough evidence. So, what I can't really prove it. All that stuff. You really want to consult with an attorney. You can contact me. I'll put you in touch. And there's also two ways to get around that statute of limitations. You can file all kind of motions saying, hey, my client was so damaged emotionally and mentally by this post-traumatic syndrome that she was in no condition to file a charge during the statute of limitations, and you can get that extended. So it's not the deal's over because of the statute of limitations. That's very important. Now,
right, and they did that. They anticipated that sort of in this case when they filed it. They didn't just file for battery, sexual battery. They also filed, for intentional infliction of emotional distress. Exactly. I guess anticipating if they had been defeated on the first one, they could still go forward with the second.
Okay, so now he's saying that the Queen took away his admiralcy. He's no longer vice admiral, right? Of his duties there. And you think that's because the judge ruled in favor of Virginia Guthrie?
Yeah, not only that, they said that he'll be defending, Buckingham Palace put out a statement saying that he'll be defending the case as a private citizen, not as a member of the royal family. So, that means we think that they might think there's some merit. I mean, it's sort of an open secret that within the royal family that Prince Andrew is at least a womanizer, never, let alone a pedophile, It's known that he's particularly back in like the 90s, that he was out partying all the time and dogging, as it were.
Yeah.
So they know what's going on, and they're just trying to distance themselves from it. Basically, it's a shame that he's not keeping his honorific Your Royal Highness, because there really is no better representation of what the monarchy is than what Prince Andrew is being accused of.
It's so true.
They used to have the right to first night. That's a thing, back in feudal times, where a lord on the wedding night of a woman would take her to bed the first time before her husband. That was his right. And it's the same sort of attitude that Andrew had.
Very interesting, because when I interviewed Jimmy Savile's niece, that's what she said. That's what happened to her. That the first time he molested her, she was on 12 years old, and they dressed her up in his fancy party dress because he was coming over, and they put her on his lap, and he just did whatever he wanted right in front of the whole family. And then he showed up again. She didn't see him for years, and he showed up again at her engagement party and pulled her into a corner and molested her again. It's similar to, right before the marriage, like you said. Just fascinating, the culture, how it's ingrained.
Definitely. Yeah, so that's moving forward, that case.
But by the way,
you said,
yeah, real quick, one more thing too. The last time I had Hoffenberg on the show, his very last appearance, we were talking about Andrew and his relationship to Epstein and Adnan Khashoggi and those characters. And he said that Prince Andrew was involved in international arms deals.
Oh.
Fascinating, right?
I mean, Khashoggi definitely was, yeah.
Yeah, Khashoggi was.
Andrew sort of has tried to style himself as a businessman and cut deals with plenty of people using his name. I wouldn't be surprised if arms came into it at some point.
Right.
Sort of a fixer. So I don't know how great he is as a fixer.
He couldn't fix his own problems. Couldn't fix his own problems. That's for sure. Sitting on the hot seat here. Although he's facing no criminal time because the Met over there in England gave him a clear, they cleared him. Says there's nothing here to charge him with.
Yeah, well, this age of consent is different in Britain. It's 16, I believe, and the acts here, I think, they say when she was a child under 18. I think she was 16 or 17.
Gotcha.
And, that's the case with a lot of, I've sort of dipping my toe back in the past few days to France. I've been following the story in France with Jean-Luc Brunnel. I'm trying to talk to more people over there, and I've talked to some people recently. And one of the big problems is the age of consent is only recently 15 in France. So it's really hard for them to get people who, were under the age of consent and are willing to testify and are, not outside of the statute of limitations to come forward to the police investigation. It makes it a lot harder for them to go through that.
And one of the very early lawsuits with Virginia Giuffre, there's a photograph of her on the Staten Island ferry. I think it's been sealed since that time. And if you see that picture of her, she was a little kid. This was a little kid, It wasn't some, teen party girl, all that kind of stuff. This was a little kid, man. And I think that's the most disturbing picture I've seen. The other thing that always disturbed me about the Epstein case with these young girls was when you read the search warrant affidavit, where they talk about the police come knocking at the door, unexpected. And they tell the parents what their kids, happened. And the kids denied it, and then the cops would leave, and then the parents would talk to the kids, and the kids would give in and tell what really happened. Can you just imagine what went on in those households all over Palm Beach? It must have been insane.
Oh, yeah, devastating. I mean, the Netflix documentary they put out about Jeffrey Epstein, which isn't my favorite documentary in the world, but one great thing they had was they had this footage of interviews by the police when they were questioning these girls to try to tell them about what happened, and they just sound so scared. They don't want to say anything. They blur their faces, but they're like children. They are children.
Yeah, little kids. But we're talking to Marlon Ettinger, who's been covering the Ghislaine Maxwell trial over there, and now he's covering the sentencing. If we ever get to that portion, and also to the formerly. The prince, formerly known as Andrew, over there in his lawsuit against his defense against his lawsuit from Virginia Giuffre. So real quick, off the air we were talking about some of the other Giuffre settlements, and I think one we came up with was that she received a settlement from a defamation lawsuit against Dershowitz, right?
Undisclosed. They need that settlement. They settled out of court, probably. Yeah.
Well, it's mentioned. It's mentioned in some other litigation by Brad Edwards that he settled that case.
Right. Yeah. And he settled with Brad Edwards too, I believe.
Oh, really?
Dershowitz.
Yeah. Okay.
And Giuffre got a settlement from Maxwell at one point.
Right.
There's actually an interesting development in that case because that case ended a while ago because they settled, but there's been a battle on open records for it, and very recently, after being convicted, Ghislaine Maxwell had been arguing that these John Does shouldn't be disclosed, but she's now dropped any opposition to that. And so there's a bunch of undisclosed Does, so it could be men or women actually. And so she's not going to oppose any unsealing of those names anymore.
Right. Just to be clear, this was a list of names in the Maxwell Giuffre lawsuit, Giuffre versus Maxwell for defamation, I believe, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And a list of people that were also involved in these crimes that they've been fighting to keep silent. And as a matter of fact, there was some John Doe third party, what do you call it? Not ex parte, I forget what it's called. Where they yeah, right. There you go. Where they go in there and try and get it to keep it sealed too, and people were wondering who that was. They were fighting to keep that sealed. But now we have Maxwell saying she doesn't want it sealed anymore. She doesn't care.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
She's got her own problems. I figured. My speculation is that maybe she asked some of them to testify in her defense, and nobody showed up. They all wanted to do it anonymously, and now who cares? From her point of view.
Very interesting.
She's not going to defend them anymore.
Very interesting. Now, you were talking about how off there we were talking about how Andrew met Roberts.
Yeah. Well, he met Epstein first through Ghislaine Maxwell. They supposedly met Epstein in '99, and they became quick friends. There's flight logs showing him flying on his jet in '99 already, not long after they met. And then he met Giuffre, of course, through Ghislaine Maxwell. It was at Ghislaine Maxwell's home. There's that infamous picture of Ghislaine Maxwell now a convicted child sex trafficker, Virginia Giuffre, and Prince Andrew right next to her. She claims that that photo is a fake. That's what the attack he's went, which has come up before. There's been claims, I think Maxwell tried to at one point, but Prince Andrew is really saying it's a Photoshop. It's not real. He doesn't remember ever being upstairs in the house, so it can't be real. It's up there with the idea that he can't sweat. He has no proof of any of it. But that's what he's saying. He's claiming he never even met Virginia Giuffre or doesn't remember ever meeting her. And another part of his claim is that he was at Pizza Express for one of his daughter's birthdays, the night that allegedly happened. And Pizza Express, for American listeners, I spent some time in England. Pizza Express is like a downscale Pizza Hut. Not. You would never be at Pizza Express, and anyone who ever saw him at Pizza Express would, they would not forget that for the rest of their lives. It would be crazy to see members of the royal family at Pizza Express. But he can't get anybody to testify that he was there. As part of discovery, which is going on in this trial, he's been challenged to produce evidence of where he was been, but he can't. He has no witnesses that can testify that he was ever at this Pizza Express. And basically the upshot is, as the judge just ruled, he's now preparing for this trial, and he's going to be defending it privately. So he's been trying to raise some more money for that. He settled this debt on his house he has in Switzerland, this chalet. He paid like a $9.1 million debt off, and now he's going to try to sell it, supposedly. He could probably get around $22 million for it. So maybe he's preparing for a settlement, maybe he's preparing just for legal fees, but he's trying to grub some money up.
Well, maybe for his escape. You never know. It could be for his escape. Now, what about, it's funny because you mentioned that picture, the picture of the young Virginia Roberts, I think 17 years old in that picture. Am I correct, 17? With the Andrew?
I believe so.
No, roughly 17. Yeah. And a lot of people point to that picture and say, look at her, she's a teenager, she's practically an adult. And so, when meanwhile, if you look at those other pictures, a little kid on the Staten Island ferry, they're in like shorts and a sweatshirt. It was pathetic. But interesting. You see in that picture, and who has her head poked around the wall? Ghislaine Maxwell. And when you look at that picture, the first thing that pops into my mind is the picture of Bill Clinton walking his daughter, Chelsea Clinton, down the aisle for her wedding day. And every other person's facing straight forward, right? But Ghislaine Maxwell has to pop her head around and get into that picture too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That just made me think. I hadn't thought of this, but at the trial, there was testimony from Juana Lisi, the house manager, that Ghislaine Maxwell loved photography. She was always taking photos. A lot of the photos that are supposedly found in this house were taken by Ghislaine. So she knew that was a very conscious thing. She knew what she was looking like in every picture that was taken of her. She was like, it was like her hobby, semi-professional hobby, her taking pictures.
Just fascinating. I would love to get into these people's heads and figure out what they're thinking. Now, you mentioned before Jean-Luc Brunnel, who was the French modeling agent, model scout, who had a whole 60 minutes segment on his lifestyle and then the allegations against him, drugging young women, trafficking in young women. So well known for his activity. I've had guests on my show like Heather Braden who knew him. What's going?
I'd like to talk to Heather.
Oh, great! I'll put you in touch with Heather. Yeah, excellent. She loves to talk about all this. She was approached by Trump too several times. She's got a whole list of people, as a matter of fact. She could tell you about. But what's going on with the Brunnel case right now?
Basically, he was arrested at the end of the year in 2020. He was on his way to Dakar, in the capital of Senegal. Supposedly, he says for New Year's Eve, but the French authorities say that he was trying to flee, and he was arrested for, I believe it was involuntary intercourse with a minor or something like this, rape essentially. And he had his bail denied early in 2021, and he's been in prison since then while an investigation proceeds against him. Now, the reason he was arrested at all was Virginia Giuffre. She during the pandemic in 2020, she went to France for like a month. She had to quarantine and testify to the police because they'd been long looking for people inside the statute of limitations to lock him up on, but hadn't been able to get anyone to, testify against him who was inside the statute of limitations. But she was inside the statute of limitations with her claims against him. So her testimony is the reason that he's in prison right now. And it's just a slow process. I talked with Fischio Huisman, who he had drugged her right when she was like 18, 19 years old. And she's been following this case she's been talked a lot in the press about it. And she said it's just a slow process. There have been no updates. She's going to talk with her lawyer like next week, and we'll find out. Hopefully I'll find out more then. I'm trying to talk to the lawyer who's representing a lot of victims there. Her name is Anne-Claire Lejeune. But it's basically just a long, slow process. They try to find people inside of the statute of limitations to testify against it.
Yeah, Brunnel is a fascinating character in all this. That he had the reputation of being able to get visas for these young girls and fly them around the world, right? And also to had some kind of deal with airplane upgrades, that he can get them airplane upgrades too as well, flights. And then his friendship with Epstein was so intense that he was the single most frequent visitor to Epstein in his Palm Beach when he was at that Palm Beach Sheriff's private wing over there, that actually visited Epstein more days than there were visiting days available to visit. So it means one day he visited twice. So extremely close, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, bosom buddies. Sarah Ransome, one of the victims who has come out with a book recently, she talks a bit about Brunnel in her book. She was sort of recruited as a model and brought to him, and she called Brunnel and Maxwell best of friends, and Brunnel was very close to Epstein. But yeah, the visas is a really fascinating angle because Jean-Luc Brunnel is a modeling agent and an international modeling agent, so he sort of had the infrastructure in place. There is a legitimate reason to get visas for international models, but it seems like what he was doing was not a legitimate way. He would be bringing these models to this apartment building in Manhattan, which was owned by Mark Epstein,
right,
Jeffrey's brother, and put these models up there and get them these work visas, but then they would never work. They'd be doing other things. And Epstein was always hanging around. This was MC2 models, which just a couple of years ago was dissolved. And MC2, that was invested in by Jeffrey Epstein, about $1 million. He supposedly gave Brunnel $1 million line of credit, actually. And the idea of MC2 is that the silent partner is Epstein, the E, MC squared, EN squared. So he's a fascinating character, and I'm really looking forward to if there's ever a trial with him. Though, the charges have nothing to do with Epstein in France. So it may not ever come up, his involvement with Epstein, if it comes to trial. It may be another very narrow, limited prosecution. But France also has a different system.
Okay.
You're guilty.
Right.
You're not presumed innocent.
Right.
You're presumed guilty.
Right.
So he has a higher bar to clear. So that stuff might come up.
Yeah, and like in England, you can't talk about a defendant in a case before they're convicted. You can't discuss it at all in the news. It's just the laws are so different around the world. But now it's interesting how we're talking about Jean-Luc Brunnel and his ability to obtain these visas. Donald Trump owned his own modeling agency too, Trump Modeling. And when he was sued, but the same thing you just described. This young Haitian girl, and by the way, his website used to say that they were importing models as young as 12 years old. This is what it used to say on the Trump Modeling Agency website. And he was sued because he brought in this Haitian girl who was very young. He put her in a studio apartment with bunk beds. So there was like 6 girls staying in there. And the same kind of thing you're describing, right? And again, too, okay, we'll get your modeling work, but we're going to deduct all these expenses, the FedEx bill, the makeup, the limousine taking you over there. We're going to deduct all these expenses, and now you made nothing. Okay, but we're going to feed you and keep you in this room. And the lawyer that sued Trump Modeling Agency said that the majority of Trump's use of the HB1 visa process was for the Trump modeling agency, not all these Irish construction workers he was importing in to do all this kind of work at his different, all his construction projects and golf courses and stuff. It was for the Trump modeling agency. And the guy who he put in charge of that was the guy who ran the fashion cafe in Manhattan, and Trump later gave him a pardon.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that 60 Minutes investigation. I think that was 88 or 89, with Brunnel. It's called American Girls in Paris. You can check it out online. But so after that, Brunnel was he was so sleazy as a modeling agent, he was run out of the Paris fashion world in the 90s, which you got to be pretty sleazy to be run out of the Paris fashion world in the 90s. And he came to New York, and where do you think he bought an apartment?
Trump Tower.
He lived in Trump Tower. Yeah, and he was good friends with Donald Trump and this other modeling agent called Paolo Zampelli, who was big in Milan at one point. And Zampelli was Melania's agent. She supposedly introduced her to Donald Trump and now has some ambassador position. There's still pictures, you can see this recent pictures on his Instagram with him with Trump and Melania. So, Trump and Brunnel actually were very close themselves. There was some article in the French media that mentioned that they always used to go around picking up models, Brunnel, Zampelli, and Trump, and getting kind of handsy and aggressive. And Brunnel once flew out a bunch of models to Mar-a-Lago for a private party. This was, again, in the French press, there was a model who said that, they brought us out to Mar-a-Lago, like 20, 30 of us. And it was Brunnel who organized it.
Yeah, I interviewed two of the girls that were there. One was Heather Braden, and the other one was Barbara Pilling, who was, I think she was, she gets mad at me all the time about this. I believe she was 17 at the time. But she was either 17 or 16. And she told Trump she was a year older than what she actually was. And he even said, that's perfect. That's the perfect age. So fascinating stuff, man. What about the lawsuit? At one point, Brunnel sued Epstein, saying that all the bad publicity gave him a bad reputation, cut into his income. Do you know what happened? Yeah. Do you know what happened with that one? It's just unbelievable. Do you know what happened with that?
I mean, he was basically saying that the modeling MC2, this modeling agency's reputation was mud after all this stuff was coming out, and he could no longer get, parents wouldn't let their daughters understandably work for him anymore. And he got one of the most interesting parts about that suit is he got a lot of character witnesses to send letters to testify to his reputation. And they were people that he was still working with. I think Nordstrom, one of the people at Nordstrom sent him. And this was, just a few, within the past 5 years or so, testifying that, just, he's a great guy. He'd never do anything. And all these people are still working with him. And he can still work. Supposedly, he now dissolved MC2, and there's this new agency called Imagine Talent or something like that, which is basically MC2. It has the same lawyer. It has the same, most of the same clients.
Yeah.
So before he was arrested, he was planning to just keep going.
Just fascinating. And we can't forget John Casablancas from Elite Modeling Agency either, who was best buddies with Trump. Married a girl he met when she was 14 years old. She was a 14-year-old model. He married her later on. Had pictures of himself with these 14-year-old girls at Studio 54 with cookies and milk. They were drinking milk out of champagne glasses and cookies off a silver tray. And then Trump actually sent his daughter, Ivanka, 13-year-old Ivanka, to Elite Modeling Agency. Just fascinating what goes on with this bunch. Marlon Ettinger, we got about 2 minutes left, man. What do you want to leave us with besides a bucket to throw up into?
There's a bunch of a couple other court cases that are pretty interesting going on. There's still the Giuffre versus Dershowitz civil litigation, and Dershowitz just filed a letter saying that he had deposed Les Wexner recently. His whole claim is that Giuffre and her lawyers were just trying to extort Les Wexner, and that's the reason they accused him. And he bases it on the claim that one of Giuffre's childhood friends who she reconnected with came to Dershowitz and said that, she told her this, but if you read the deposition, it's not entirely clear. That's not exactly true, what this friend told her. So look out for that one. I'm writing up something about that one. It's a really fascinating case. I've been trying to talk with Dershowitz more. He'll talk to anybody, but he'll say nothing. That type of guy.
Well, he wrote a book clearing his name. He wrote a book saying I've been proven not guilty.
I read that book, actually.
Yeah.
And it's very clever because if you don't know much about the case, you might be convinced by it. But if you know anything about the case, there's a lot of gaping holes in that book.
Also too, real quick, people, they talk about that open mic. I think it was an ABC News anchor woman who was talking about we had all this, and that was Epstein. Dershowitz admitted that he's the one that got that shut down and got that whole report taken down. So the guy's a little bit of everyone. Yeah. Oh yeah, he admitted it. Okay.
Well, there was that other story about him trying to get a pardon for Maxwell from Trump.
That's right.
I asked him about that, and he said, I'm not going to comment on anything and any meetings I've had with anybody.
Okay, great.
Any meetings I may have had with anybody.
How did you leave off with him? You think he'll take your call again?
Yeah, I think he'll take my call again.
Okay, great. All right, man, keep us posted. Marlon Ettinger, you can find him once again at his where he writes his articles is footnotesnews.substack.com. Be sure and follow him on Twitter, prolific Twitter, keeping us up to date on all his work. His great work here. Thank you so much, Mr. Marlon Ettinger.
Thank you, Mr. Enoch.
Good night, my friend. Bye.